What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by StatHero. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, not really able to record in the usual spot, not even really able to have a cold open with the router crashing just about 30 minutes ago. But nonetheless, joined by a very special guest. Glad to have him finally on. That is Jacob Lane, co-founder of The State of Louisville and co-host of From the Pink Seats podcast. Jake, man, appreciate you hopping on the show, especially on these circumstances.
Look, man, after this whole, shenanigans with the technology, I'm just glad you didn't, exit on me and say, this is a sign of what was to come. I appreciate you just hanging tight with me because, like I said, we're going up. You can't get worse from how we started, man. Glad to be here, though.
That
Thanks
is
for having me.
very true. That is very true. But I appreciate you made a compliment on the backdrop. I kind of like this backdrop. It's a little different from just the cream white colored background that I'm used to, but nonetheless. So. But I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a step back. Jacob is really kind of submerged in everything Louisville football and does a great job of breaking that down with Matt McGavick and Vince Lococo on From the Pink Seats podcast. For those who don't check that out, most recent episode has Scott Satterfield on, which definitely go check that out. But we'll talk about some of the key positional battles as spring practice comes to a close and as we inch closer to the offseason. We'll kind of break that down into some players to watch. And then finally, in the last segment, we'll talk about what are the realistic expectations for the Louisville Cardinals in year 4 under Scott Satterfield. Starting out, Jacob, first you got to tell me, what was it like to get Sat on the podcast? What were some of the big takeaways that you had, and what was that vibe like?
Man, I got to tell you, it was a little bit of a bucket lister for me. Obviously, I got to sit down with Coach Chris Mack several years ago, back when things were still going good with him at Louisville, and I always wanted to, get a football coach on and be able to talk with the head football coach, especially now hosting that podcast. And it was great, man. It was very casual, laid back conversation. Just able to talk a little bit about what happened last year and some of the negatives, and really how they're using those to fuel 2022. And really kind of that comeback that we, expected really, quite frankly, last year. So it was great to chop it up with him. He got a little bit into his personal side with his relationship with Jerry Moore, the former App State head coach and legend there, and talked about, what NFL offenses and players he likes to watch. And, just a couple of other, really just more personal things that we don't really get to hear from Stat because, usually it's the media grilling him, at least as of late. So I definitely would encourage your listeners to check that out. For me, biggest takeaway is just the kind of the changes they've made with the staff this offseason and the initiative to take the next step and become one of the top teams in the ACC. I know fans don't want to hear it, and Scott Satterfield said as much, and everyone knows what he said last year sucks to hear, but Louisville was so close in so many games. They lost 4 of their 7 games by a combined 13 points. It really could have gone the complete opposite direction for them. And so this offseason, they're finding guys, former SEC guys. Obviously, Ben Souders comes from a championship pedigree with Georgia, knows what it's like to build a championship program from a strength and weight conditioning side of things. And then obviously you bring in Lance Taylor. You add a guy like Deion Branch. You bring in, Coach Cardwell. And obviously it sucks to lose Coach Bicknell, but you're lucky to have a guy who's been in the building who can easily slide over there. And then you bring in Coach Stepp from Georgia State, who is a former offensive coordinator. Now you've got 3 guys on your staff who have been offensive coordinators in a past life. So it was just really encouraging to hear Stat talk about the really important changes that they've made and how that's going to parlay into inches, Dalton. We're talking about inches in a lot of circumstances with
Right.
Louisville. And I know, again, there was a lot of blown leads, and there's much more. We'll get into all that stuff, I'm sure. But for Scott Satterfield, it is how do you get better when it's inches that define your program being 6-7, 8-4, 9-3 type of year. So I think that they're laying the foundation for that in spring right now. And, with a lot of the guys they got back and some of the injuries that they're having to work through in spring, I think that they're really setting themselves up for a big comeback year in 22.
Jimmy V, one of the great quotes in that SB speech was, how do you go from where you are to where you want to be? And I think that that's really the question under year 4, because I think everyone understands that even despite the recruiting, the uptick in
Mhm.
recruiting that we're seeing in the 2023 class, we have to see some results in year 4 of Scott Satterfield. Like you said, it has been basically a difference of inches. I've been referring on this show for all fall. It's the little things. I feel like this team has struggled with doing the little things. But we turn the page, we look forward to the spring. What are some of the key positional battles as obviously the spring game, early April? So we're probably about halfway through spring practice. And then
Mhm.
as we head to the off season, what kind of stands out to you position wise in terms of some battles that you're kind of zooming in on?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of guys coming back. So there are positions that, really aren't up for grabs, mostly, along the offensive line. Obviously, there'll be some shuffling that goes on, but, guys like Malik Cunningham, Tyler Harrell and Marshawn Ford and some of those guys are locked. Caleb Chandler are locked into their spots. So it's really some of the pieces around them. And for me, it goes to the wide receiver spot that has been vacated by Justin Marshall this offseason and now is in the hands of two transfers, and D. Wiggins from Miami and then Tyler Hudson from Central Arkansas. The way that Scott Satterfield talked about Tyler Hudson, which his nickname is Huddy, which I'm not going to lie, I need a shirt that says Huddy on it ASAP. T-shirt hooligan, I need to hop on that ASAP. But, Tyler Hudson is a guy that comes in with a lot of star potential from a lower level. And it's really now about, can he get up to speed in the offense? Can he kind of develop into that go-to guy to become an all ACC caliber wide receiver? There's a lot of people who think he can do that. So watching him versus D. Wiggins, a guy who's looking for kind of a role upgrade, Miami, he was behind a number of different receivers over the course of his 4 years there. He still, was an impactful player. Obviously, Louisville felt the brunt force of that several years ago in that lopsided
Right.
game where he scored on that 70, 80-yard touchdown, whatever it was. But to see him now in a Louisville uniform, to know that Justin Marshall really was never able to kind of take it to the next level at that position and elevate it. It's interesting to see what these two guys who come in with a chip on their shoulder can do out there and what that will bring as a compliment to Malik Cunningham. And then, of course, the other receivers like Harrell, Huggins, Bruce, Ford, the running backs they have in the backfield there. So that's where my eye goes automatically with the offense. A secondary one that's more of a backup position battle for me is the tight end spot. We've talked a lot about this offseason that, quite frankly, Stu Holt was a guy who, if he hadn't left for the role at Virginia Tech, quite possibly could have been on the chopping block for losing his job, because he just underproduced from a coaching standpoint of developing his talent, right? We've seen Marshawn Ford obviously be really good, but outside of him and then Ian Pfeiffer, who came in and really was more of a blocker, what have we seen from that position? Not really much. And then you've got two
Right.
guys in Vic Mullen and Christian Peterson, who were really highly regarded tight ends coming out of high school, had some nice offers. They bring varying skill sets to the offense. They both are fits at what they do. So how will Josh Stepp get those guys involved? And obviously he's not here for the spring, but how will they get the tight ends kind of to take that next step, and those guys to develop into quality H-backs and those outside tight ends who can play down the field? I think that's going to be really important to Malik Cunningham, just giving him more weapons. And then another just kind of note here, Scott Satterfield told us Evan Conley's not been practicing in spring because of an injury. He said early in spring that Caleb Johnson, the freshman who enrolled early, was dealing with some injury issues, and he was a light go. So it's really Malik Cunningham and Brock Doman. And Scott Satterfield talked pretty highly of Brock Doman, who was a late addition last year. So that backup spot is really up in the air. I mean, I don't think that even Scott Satterfield knows right now who that will be. I think if he wants it to be Evan Conley, assuming that he's healthy, but can Brock Doman really use this time in spring as the only other scholarship quarterback to take a step and kind of prove that he can be a backup? Or does this really kind of set the stage for Caleb Johnson to emerge as the backup once he's healthy? I think that's going to be more than interesting to watch, especially in a spring game where two quarterbacks have to play. We're going to see some guys we've not really seen, and he'll be one of them there. And then on the defensive side of things, the guard position left vacant by Jack Fagot. Behind him are two studs, Marvin Dallas and Ben Perry, a move safety who is bulked up this offseason. I think I saw somewhere that he's up somewhere like 30 pounds, 25 pounds, something like that. They are going to add a new dimension at that other outside linebacker spot. And if you get Marvin Dallas or Ben Perry up to speed where they can play, free without really being stuck in thinking mode and knowing what to do, but being disciplined in their spots and adding that rusher, that blitzer, that guy who can tackle in space to go along with a back from injury, Monty Montgomery, who stands to probably compete with, Yasir Abdullah for the top edge rushing sacks role. And then you got obviously Yasir on the other side, man. That is such a dangerous combo to me. And I'm really interested to see, do they go with Marvin Dallas, who is, he's been a special teams guy, but when he has been on the field, he has made stuff happen. Last year, he had an interception, 2 fumble recoveries, 21 total tackles. He made, he had a couple tackles for loss. He made plays when they put him in, but he also had his moments where he looked like he was a young guy. So do they go with a guy like him who's really been just kind of this really unique, versatile weapon, or does Ben Perry, the former 4-star safety who had all those big offers, does he emerge as a playmaker, as a redshirt freshman and get on the field? Regardless, Louisville stands to benefit from that position, and that will be one that will probably go all the way up until the start of the season. And regardless, those two guys are going to both play a lot. They're going to be really good, in my opinion, and that's one of the many of reasons I think the defense is going to be taking a big step forward again in 2022.
And they're going to have to. If Louisville wants to achieve these goals, they're going to have to take a considerable step forward in a couple different respects. I really am glad that you mentioned the wide receiving committee. I think that's kind of where my head gravitates toward when I think about the big positional battle, because, it seems like we're still kind of waiting for the next standouts to really emerge. We thought that could be Watkins and Justin Marshall. They end up going elsewhere. And, we kind of look at Amari Huggins-Bruce, Tyler Harrell, Huddy, D. Wiggins, and then also, some other guys like maybe a Josh Johnson enters the mix and stuff like that. So I want to take this time now to kind of break it down a little bit more, kind of go into some of the players that you're looking to watch for, and I'll identify some of mine as well. We'll do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, StatHero Look. Usually, I think every year with March Madness, my bracket gets absolutely crushed week one. Game one. It seems like I literally lose the first game every single time. That's why you need to start investing in StatHero. It offers single game pick'ems where it pits the star players of the Power Five against each other. It's one of those to where it's really what daily fantasy was made to be. So do yourself a favor. You can sign up today for free and get a 100% deposit match by signing up at stathero.com/lockedon while using the promo code LOCKEDON. Once again, that's stathero.com/lockedon while using the promo code LOCKEDON. As always, I want to say thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. As I mentioned here with a special guest, Jacob Lane, good friend of mine, former, I guess you could say, co-workers at the Big Red Louie and at the state of Louisville as well. But Jacob is
more importantly,
co-founder.
We're pals. That's what's most important.
Yes, sir. Of course, 100%. Jacob, co-founder of the state of Louisville and co-host, better half of the co-host of From the Pink Seats podcast. No disrespect to my man.
Damn straight. Matt. You got that straight, man. I love it. Love it.
But want to kind of shift gears, look into certain players to watch for. And I think that, kind of building off the past segment, and you can kind of pick up on this. I'm really interested to see how MJ Griffin does with this Louisville defense. With Quinterio Cole going to the NFL draft, I think, number one, it's huge that they're getting Kendrick Duncan Jr. back. Like that cannot be understated. But now I think the skill set that MJ brings to the table, very solid tackler, and also, hard hitting as well, kind of feels like we're going to see kind of a replication of the production that we saw from Q Cole. Is that one of the vibes that you're getting when you think about MJ as possibly the starter next to Kendrick?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the plan. I think he's going to be a guy who, maybe it doesn't have quite the tackles that Q Cole had last year because he was one of the top 3 or 4 guys, but, finishes somewhere in that 60 to 70 range, 50, 60, 70, somewhere in that range, has a couple of interceptions, makes a few big plays, but he'll have some competition back there, man. That's one of those groups that's going to be really exciting to watch. There are so many transfers that I've lost track. Guys named Jaden and Jalen and They bring in Nicario Harper and they bring in, MJ Griffin, who Scott Satterfield, who also sounded like he forgot his name, called him M. Griffin, which I thought was hilarious. I don't know why, but and then you obviously have Josh Minkins. You've got, some of the other guys who were in the class last year, some incoming guys as well. So, I mean, that secondary is the very obvious weak spot for Louisville entering 2022. And if they don't figure it out, it doesn't matter how good everybody else is. We're going to be watching the football go right over their head time and time again, flashbacks of 2018, 19, 20. So this spring, man, I'm hoping that they can get a guy like Griffin to a place where he can provide that level of production, because they need it. They need every ounce of it. And what will be different in 2022 is you don't have to play Cole and Duncan every single snap. I mean, they played 95% of the snaps out there together. You could tell they were exhausted. They got caught, watching the backfield and positions where they should have been trying to make a play. I'm not a football player, obviously. You look at me, but I know that fatigue causes you to kind of take a quick second to think a little bit longer about what you're doing. And so when you don't have that, you don't have guys playing, all these snaps, and you can go to a proven FCS All-American like Nicario Harper. Once he gets here, you've got multiple other guys back there who can play make. Josh Minkins being one of them as well. Like I said, it's a game changer. But the thing is they've got to get coached up. They got to get coached up, and they got to be in a point where Air Force doesn't happen. You know what I mean? My random guys getting into the game and they just look like random guys like you and I.
I feel like I would have made a great slot receiver. I'm quick, but I can't take a hit. So if I get hit, I'm going out of the game. Like
Yeah.
you're putting me in the injury tent. But if it's a sprint, I feel like I may have a chance. Probably not, but that's just me being wishful thinking. Outside of MJ, who is another player or players that you're kind of looking at thinking, okay, he's probably under the microscope as we kind of go through spring ball, or maybe even it's a newcomer that's not even on campus yet. Who does your mind gravitate toward?
Yeah, so sticking to the defensive side of the football, there's two guys that I'm watching in particular this spring. They play similar positions. The first being Yasir Abdullah, who we ought to be thanking our lucky stars that he came back instead of either declaring for the NFL draft or potentially, pursuing a graduate transfer to go play for a school like Florida, where his dad played some time ago and was a great football player. We got to be thankful that Yasir Abdullah came back for one more year, because he's got a chance to be first team All ACC, one of the top pass rushers in the entire country. I mean, the guy had 10 sacks last year, essentially rushing the passer all by himself. So imagine, like I said, when you get guys like Dallas on the field and guys like Momo Sanogo and guys like Monty Montgomery back, what you can unleash with your Yasir Abdullah. So this spring is all about really improving his pass rush, making sure he's adding some more moves, getting a little bit more versatile. He is a really solid, defender in coverage when you ask him to do that. But being able to improve on things like that makes him, as an undersized linebacker, much more attractive to the NFL. He has really got the potential to have a special season for Louisville. One that would go, potentially in the record books. I mean, Devontae Fields is the last guy to have over 10 sacks. He had 11 and a half back in 2000, I think in 16. So, I mean, you're talking about Yasir, potentially being able to, maybe he doesn't have 12 sacks, 13 sacks. Maybe it's that 10 number. Hopefully it's more, but, able to add a couple more interceptions, force a couple more fumbles, a couple more tackles for loss on third downs, just things like that. So I'm really watching for him. And then the other guy who really intrigues me is Yaya Diaby, because Louisville desperately needs that second defensive end, or that second kind of guy who can get sacks. Last year, Ashton Gelati was second on the team in sacks with 4. They need somebody who can live in that 6 to 8 range. And Yaya Diaby by no means is measuring QB hits and QB hurries a great statistic for what could be. But last year, he looked like he struggled in a lot of games to really close and get the sack. But he was right there in a lot of places. And that's the first step in kind of putting it together. I think this offseason, he already looks jacked. But if you've seen pictures of him, my God, Ben Souders – I had to have walked in and be like, that's the canvas right there. Like, we're going to shape this guy to look like a Greek god. And that's what he's looking like so far in pictures. So if they can take that type of development to the field, again, he has some of those natural abilities that you just can't teach in terms of strength and size and bend. It's all about putting it together, making sure he's in the right place at the right time, being able to read offenses and what offensive linemen are doing. So that's really important to me, because again, the offense is going to be so good next year. I think you and I probably both agree on that. It's just about the defense,
Yeah.
even just being a smidge better for Louisville to go from 6 to 8. That's a big jump,
Or
but
even 9. I mean,
right,
maybe, yeah.
exactly. That's not out of the question. We'll get to that here momentarily. That's definitely not out of the
Yeah.
question. And people are going to watch this and be like, oh, here we go again. Going to predict 9 wins. And I feel that, but there's reasons it's different this year, particularly with guys like Yasir Abdullah and then guys like Yaya who showed flashes, but really just need some help to kind of round things in. And I think that's where we're at with the defense. Offensively, man, Tyler Harrell, our good friend, beat writer for the New York Daily News up there, DJ Benamy, he tweeted something last year, and it really stuck with me. He obviously has no care in the world to be watching Louisville football. Like, the Jets are already bad enough. He has to watch that. But he was watching a Louisville game, and he just made a simple tweet that said, whoever number 8 is an NFL wide receiver, without any context to it. And so he saw the raw ability of Tyler Harrell. So it's all about this year. Again, how can you add to that? How can you become more than just the vertical guy? Can you add some more to your route tree? Can you become a more dynamic middle of the field, outside the outside the numbers kind of guy? Satterfield talked about how important that is going to be for Malik Cunningham this year. So can Tyler Harrell take that next step and be more than just a 4-3 guy? You know what I'm saying? Like, last year, you talk about Tyler Harrell, and it's like, man, he's fast. He's open on deep balls. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But eventually defenses are going to start to read that. And he's going to be able to cut off routes and come underneath and make plays within the middle of the field and kind of open himself up to more hits and things of that nature. So if he can do that this spring, really focus on building that rapport with Malik Cunningham, I think he's in a spot, man. He's got the speed to really be an impact player. And if you were to tell me he was at 850, 950 yards next year, wouldn't be shocking to me. I think that would probably be, right about where I would think he should be, because he is just so dynamic. You can't tell me you can't put the ball in his hands on a 3-yard screen and see him take it 77 yards. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see more of that this year, but that's on him to show he can do more than just go straight.
I agree. And if he even gets close to eclipsing the 1,000-yard mark, he's going to get drafted in the first 3 rounds. With that speed, with what the NFL has kind of shifted to in terms of what they value in a wide receiver, with speed and quickness, if he's flirting with 1,000 yards, obviously something went right, or some things went right, and he's flirting with a good draft position. But I do want to. This is probably the most enthusiastic I've been about like this upcoming season, because there's a lot of momentum with the program, with the recruiting and stuff like that, the hires that were made. This is the firm I talked about. What are the realistic expectations for year 4 under Scott Satterfield? We'll answer that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Bet Online. Look, March Madness is in the full swing of things. It's simply the greatest time of the year, in my opinion. Maybe not necessarily for Louisville fans at the moment, with the Cardinals missing out on the tournament once again, but that shouldn't stop you from utilizing all the great features that Bet Online has. And not only, basketball, hockey, all the other sports that are going on right now. Sports information needs nowhere better to get that than Bet Online. So head to the website or use your mobile device today to sign up and receive a 100% deposit match. Bet Online is where the game starts. So you'll have to forgive me. Some of these ad reads are completely off the dome. Like, I don't have access to
You're
my
killing
scripts,
it, man.
and
You're a natural.
I can just go through and click the tabs and read directly off the script. So it has been a bit of an uncharted territory, so to speak. So, Jacob, definitely appreciate you for sticking in, but also appreciate everyone that is listening for sticking in. I obviously know it's unorthodox, but not done yet. My favorite part of the show. We're going to talk about the expectations. Now, you mentioned it. People automatically, when they think about it, they're like, oh, okay, you've drank the Kool-Aid again. Louisville's going to win 8 to 9 games. Malik Cunningham's going to be in the Heisman conversation, yada, yada, yada. And I'll be honest, I'm not faulting anyone for thinking that, because at the end of the day, shoulda, coulda, woulda only results in so much. You have to get the results. The good thing is everything's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray area. 2 things can be true at one time. Yes, you have to get the results, but let's make no mistake about it. You're right. It's not like Louisville's getting blown out in all these games, and their 6-7 is like a definitive 6-7. Like, there's no chance they could have been 9-3. there was a great chance the Louisville could have been 9-3, but everything kind of went wrong. I guess the first question is, what is kind of the lowest amount of wins that Louisville needs to have to even be considered a successful season in year 4?
Oh man, and for me, it's no less than 7, and 7 is pushing it. Like, I mean, for the last 2 years, we've sat by and watched these games end by just absolutely, defeating circumstances. Going back to the Georgia Tech game during the COVID year, where you're up by 7 with like 7 or 14 with like a minute to go, 2 minutes to go, and they end up winning by 20 something points. Just these absolutely gut wrenching losses. Like, you're at the point now where if you can't close the gap on those, what are we even wasting our time talking about? This is the year where you got to take that and you got to win those games. You got to figure out in those late minutes how to do that. And so for me, if you don't get 7 wins in an ACC that will be better, but isn't by any means one of the top football conferences, I just don't see how anyone around here can be satisfied with that. Like, I understand, like, there are some fans who look at this as we are, a mecca of college football and, 9-10 wins is the norm every year. I just don't think that's realistic. Maybe some point when you get a coach who stays here for a long period of time, which maybe that can be Satterfield. I don't know. I think we'll get a better idea of that after this year, but I just don't know if that's realistic. So if you can get back to 7 with 7 regular season wins, let me say that, not 6 with a bowl win to go into 7. I'm talking 7 out of your 12 you need to win, and then get your 8th in a bowl game. That's it for me. And if we're not talking about that, we got a different conversation to have at the end of the year about the head coaching position and the program in general. And I think that's what the great thing about
changes. I think that changes also if he doesn't win 8 games year 1.
Right. Exactly. We're celebrating 6 wins. It's the Charlie Strong 2010 type of season where you win, more than what you did and what you've kind of set the bar of like, this is what we can be at a minimum. But they won 8 games in the first year, and that's what that Satterfield sped things up. And look, I'm sure he preferred that rather than winning 3 games or 4 games, or hell, 1 or 2 was considered a victory at that point. ESPN called him being in year 0 when he took over in 2019. So, he kind of has to, he made his bed. Now he has to lie in it type of deal, but he has the opportunity to not go to sleep. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can fight back here and really shift the narrative as yourself as a coach, especially considering what's waiting to come in 2023 with Pierce Clarkson and some of these guys who will end up making what should be the greatest class in Louisville football history. I mean, that's when your program really has the chance to change overnight and really start to become a trendsetter in the conference and get back to a place where you're competing for a title every year and you're competing to play in the college football playoff every couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, Louisville fans aren't naive, and I think that Louisville fans aren't naive enough to think that 8 wins is kind of where Louisville is comfortable at. If Louisville wins 8 games a year, fans aren't going to give you hell for it. Now you'll have your sector of the fan base that thinks if you don't go 12-0, it's a disappointing season, right? But 8 wins and a 10-win season every 5 years. That's a successful coach here at the University of Louisville. Let's not kid ourselves. But the issue is we win 8 the first year. Then, COVID has things look at it, it's a little different, obviously unforeseen circumstances. So you agree to maybe discard it or take it with a grain of salt. 2021 rolls around, ACC's down, and you lose these games in a dramatic fashion that, hey, you've been in the driver's seat in these games. So now I'm willing to give him a pass until this year because we're in those games. It's not like we're getting blown out, but words only go so far. Actions have to be able to back it up. So, in your opinion, just spitballing here, knowing what knowing the productiveness of what's coming back, the potential of what we have coming in, where do without looking at the schedule, I'm not sure how much you've looked at it up until this point. It's kind of hard to gauge how good other teams are going to be. Right. What do you kind of have Louisville's over/under win total this season?
I think for me, it starts probably at, I think you'd have to put it at 6.5. Like, if I'm being very realistic in terms of what I expect that how Vegas will look at Louisville and what they did last year versus what the ACC is this year, what Louisville is this year, and how they'll bounce back. So I think that's the minimum floor is 6.5. I would be willing to kind of slide that to 7.5. I think there's a really good chance that Louisville wins 8. The way I see it, I think there's 5 games that without question Louisville should win. Syracuse, South Florida, Florida State, Boston College, and James Madison. The Boston College one is interesting because Phil Jurkovich is back, and that's a program that Jeff Hafley up there has rolling. Now, Louisville beat them last year with Dennis Grosel, and that was a kind of a clunker, but they beat them. And so that's why I'm confident that they should do it again, regardless of who's back. It's Boston College. Louisville should win that game. So then from there, the toss-ups really fall with Central Florida, who you beat by a touchdown last year, making it a true toss-up. Like, let's call that one what it is. That's a toss-up.
On the
then
road.
You got games like, right, exactly. Then you've got games like Virginia, who is now a completely different program with a new head coach and Tony Elliott from Clemson. Brendan Armstrong's back. He's looking to kind of be the ACC player of the year. So that's a toss-up for me. Pittsburgh, they lose. Kenny Pickett, going to be a first-round pick. But you get Slovis from USC, who is a former 4 or 5-star kid. Who knows what they can do up there. This year, they got a strong defense, just like always, toss-up, right? The last time they played them, Pitt had like 15 sacks. So, hopefully you can avoid that this time. Wake Forest, toss-up. Clemson, toss-up. Normally, that's an automatic L, but last year, the way Louisville moved Clemson at the line of scrimmage, toss-up for me, just off that alone. And then NC State, the only game I have no confidence in because I have no reason to have confidence in is the Kentucky game. Until I see a different product on the field, it's an automatic L on the schedule for me. So you're at a point where if you can just win out of that group of Central Florida, so that's 6 groups, Central Florida, Virginia, Pittsburgh, Wake, Clemson, NC State. If you can get 3 out of the 6, I mean, you're looking at 8 wins right there. You know what I'm saying? That's the thing. And then that schedule includes Central Florida, who you beat, Virginia, who you had until James Turner forgot how to kick a football, and then Wake Forest, who if they don't get an extra possession at the end of the first half, there you win that game. So I think Louisville is at 8 wins the way I see it, and then from there, obviously Clemson is not by any means an automatic win. That's going to be a tough game where Louisville will have a chance to win. I don't know if they will. And then NC State, they've dominated Louisville for 3 years in a row. Who am I to think that that's anything more than a toss-up, despite the fact that Louisville probably was in the driver's seat last year with that game, could have won it and did what they did down the stretch. So I'm at a point where I think the low is 7 wins. If Satterfield is anything below that, I just don't know how you go on,
I definitely agree. I think that the schedule, although you had players like you had, is Hartman back for Wake?
He sure is. Right? That almost entire team is back. I think Beal Smith, the running back there, is the only one who is who's left. But they just
So there's quarterbacks that are coming. There's quarterbacks that are coming back. I think that it's critical and very, very critical that the Cardinals have success early on because the end of the season is going to be extremely tough. And like you said, until they show that they can beat Kentucky or even make it competitive, you can't go into that game with a conscious mind and think that Louisville has a chance until they show you different. That's right. That's kind of where my mind's at. I'm at that 7.5, win mark as well. I think that 8 wins is kind of where I have them pinned at right now. But obviously, I definitely want to have you on for the schedule breakdown where we kind of go through and just check it out. But as far as this episode, man, that's going to conclude this rather unorthodox episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. My good friend Jacob Lane, thank you, man, for joining us. Obviously, for those who are not aware, at the State of Lou on Twitter, go check them out. Great content over there with all the podcast networks, with all the content that they create from the Pink Sinks Pod, Off the Walls podcast, Starting 502, much more. Go check all that out. Is it thestateoflouisville.com?
It is just stateoflouisville.com. It's interesting when you get into the versus just know the. So the stateoflouisville.com at the State of Lou on Twitter. You got that right, man.
Yes, sir. Well, that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here. Hopefully, Wi-Fi permitting, back here